Welcome to another episode of our English podcast, where we not only talk about learning English, but also dive deep into the real struggles and solutions that every language learner faces on their journey toward fluency.
That's right, and today's topic is one that we know so many people struggle with, often silently, and with a sense of frustration they can't quite put into words. How to build English-speaking habits that actually stick. Not just for a week, not just during a moment of inspiration, but for good.
It's incredibly common to start strong, maybe after watching a motivational video or hearing someone else speak English fluently, and feel that burning desire to practice every day, to talk to yourself in English, to memorize phrases, to live and breathe the language.
But what happens after a few days, maybe a week? The fire cools down, life gets busy, and before you know it, you've skipped a few days, then a few more, and that exciting new habit becomes something you used to do instead of something that defines your daily routine.
And let's be honest here, it's not because you're lazy, and it's not because you don't care enough or aren't serious about learning English. The real reason is usually that we don't understand how habits work. And more importantly, we try to build habits based on emotion, not on structure.
Exactly. And that's what this episode is going to change. Because today, we're going to talk about a new way to think about your English speaking habit, one that removes guilt, removes pressure, and replaces them with practical, repeatable steps that make speaking English feel natural and automatic over time.
Whether you're a beginner who wants to gain confidence, or someone at the intermediate level struggling to maintain consistency, the principles we'll share today will give you a realistic, sustainable strategy to finally build a speaking habit that you don't have to force yourself into every day.
You see, building a speaking habit isn't about suddenly transforming your life or speaking for hours each day. It's about learning how to make English part of your daily rhythm in a way that fits into your existing life, no matter how busy or unpredictable it may be.
So in this episode, we're going to break it down into clear sections: what triggers habits, why small steps matter, how to stay consistent even on bad days, how to measure your growth, and how to actually enjoy the process instead of just grinding through it.
And by the end, we hope you'll feel less overwhelmed, more equipped, and more motivated to make English speaking something you do naturally, without pressure, without stress, and without needing to feel inspired all the time.
Let's get started. And remember, the journey to fluency doesn't begin with a perfect sentence. It begins with the decision to speak one imperfect sentence today and every day after that. Now that we've set the stage and clarified why building a consistent English speaking habit is crucial to your long-term fluency, let's go a level deeper and explore how habits actually form, not in theory, but in real-life, practical terms that you can start applying today.
You see, one of the biggest misconceptions people have when it comes to building any kind of habit, especially one like speaking a foreign language, is the belief that the habit will just happen naturally if they care enough or want it badly enough. But unfortunately, that's not how the brain works.
The brain doesn't respond to emotions in the way we often hope it will. It doesn't build lasting patterns of behavior from motivation or passion alone, but instead it relies heavily on consistency, context, and clear triggers to decide what becomes automatic and what remains a struggle.
In other words, if your goal is to make speaking English feel effortless someday, you have to stop relying on energy or inspiration to get started, and instead build a system of simple cues, little moments in your daily routine that signal your brain, this is when I speak English.
Let's talk about that word, cue, because it's at the heart of everything we're discussing today. A cue is a small, consistent signal in your environment or your routine that tells your brain to begin a certain behavior. And the more predictable that signal is, the more automatic the behavior becomes.
Think about brushing your teeth. You don't debate whether to do it, and you don't have to psych yourself up for it each night. You just do it, because it's tied to a specific cue, like finishing dinner, putting on pajamas, or getting ready for bed.
So, when we apply this same logic to speaking English, the question becomes, what regular moment in your day can you attach this habit to? What's something you do every day without fail that could serve as your cue to start speaking English, even for just one sentence?
It could be something incredibly simple, right after making your morning coffee, while brushing your hair, during your evening walk, or even immediately after you lock your front door. The point isn't when or where, it's that it's consistent and repeatable.
Now that we've laid the foundation for how habits are formed, understanding cues, triggers, and the basic structure of repetition, it's time to move on to one of the most misunderstood yet powerful principles in habit building, especially when it comes to speaking English: starting small and staying consistent.
A lot of learners fall into the trap of thinking that in order to be successful, they need to do something impressive right from the beginning, like committing to speaking for 30 minutes every day, or memorizing 50 new words a week. But this kind of thinking, although driven by good intentions, often sets us up for failure instead of success.
It's natural to want fast results, and there's nothing wrong with ambition. But the truth is that when you aim too high too soon, you risk overwhelming yourself with expectations that your current routine, energy level, and environment simply can't support consistently over time.
And that's where the concept of starting small becomes so critical, not as a sign of weakness or low ambition, but as a strategic move that helps you build momentum, protect your motivation, and lay down the neural pathways in your brain that make speaking English a natural part of your day.
One of the most powerful ideas you can adopt is what's known in behavioral science as the minimum viable action, which means identifying the smallest possible step you can take toward your goal that still keeps you moving in the right direction, even if it only takes 1 minute of your time.
So instead of saying, I'm going to speak English for 30 minutes every morning, which might feel impossible on a busy or low energy day, you can commit to something as simple as, every morning after I drink my coffee, I'll say one sentence out loud in English about how I feel today.
That may sound small, and it is, but the point isn't the size of the action, it's the consistency of the signal you're sending to your brain. This is who I am, this is what I do. I speak English every single day, even if just for a moment.
And once that daily behavior becomes automatic, once it's no longer a question of, should I speak today, but simply, this is what I do, you can start to increase the intensity naturally, because now the habit exists, and it's easier to grow something that already exists than to create something from scratch.
It's like planting a seed. You don't dig a hole and drop in a full-grown tree. You start with a tiny seed, water it consistently, give it sunlight, and over time it becomes something strong, stable, and rooted in place. And that's exactly what a speaking habit needs.
Another important point is to recognize that your energy and motivation will fluctuate from day to day, and that's perfectly normal. You might feel inspired on Monday, exhausted on Wednesday, and distracted on Friday. But if your speaking habit is small enough, you can still do it even on your worst day.
Let me give you a concrete example. One of my students used to beat herself up because she couldn't stick to her goal of speaking for 15 minutes after work. So I told her to switch the goal to just one sentence before dinner, even if it was the simplest sentence like, I am tired today.
At first, she felt silly, like that wasn't real practice. But after a few weeks, she noticed that not only was she speaking every single day without fail, but some days she ended up saying more than one sentence. Because once she started, the pressure was gone, and the momentum carried her further than she expected.
That's the hidden power of starting small. It lowers the psychological barrier to action, it removes the fear of failure, and it builds a chain of success that your brain begins to crave and protect, because it feels good to show up, even in a small way.
Consistency is not about doing the same amount every day. It's about showing up in some way every day, even if it's just whispering a phrase while brushing your teeth, or repeating a sentence in your head while walking to work.
You might think that one sentence a day won't change your fluency, but here's the truth. One sentence a day for a year is 365 sentences. And more importantly, it's 365 moments of confidence, repetition, pronunciation, and mindset training that compound over time.
If you wait for the perfect time, the perfect mood, or the perfect technique, you'll miss the real secret to progress. Doing something imperfectly but regularly is more valuable than doing something perfectly once and never again.
So here's our challenge for you. Pick one sentence that you will say out loud in English every day, right after something you already do daily, like brushing your teeth, having your coffee, or locking your front door. And do it for the next 7 days without missing a single one.
You don't need to choose difficult vocabulary or create complex grammar structures. In fact, it's better if you keep it simple at first, because the goal is not to impress anyone. It's to create an identity. I'm the kind of person who speaks English every day.
And once that identity begins to take root in your mind, once your brain sees that this is not just a temporary phase, but a new way of being, then increasing the amount you speak will happen naturally, without needing to force yourself or rely on bursts of motivation.
Think of it like building a muscle. You don't walk into the gym and lift 100 kilos on your first day. You start light, you build consistency, and over time, what once seemed impossible becomes part of your normal capacity.
Speaking English is the same. If you try to force fluency all at once, you'll get discouraged and give up. But if you focus on the habit instead of the outcome, the fluency will eventually follow as a natural result of your commitment.
So don't underestimate the power of one sentence, one moment, one daily ritual that brings you into contact with the language, not as a chore, but as a quiet reminder that you are growing one word at a time.
And remember, your brain doesn't care how impressive your sentence is. It only cares that you showed up today, that you kept the promise, that you kept the chain alive, that you reinforced the identity of someone who speaks.
Start small, stay consistent, and trust the process. Even if you don't see instant results, know that something deep inside you is changing, strengthening, and preparing you for greater growth.
Because true progress isn't always visible in the moment, but when you look back after a few months and realize that English is no longer something you study, but something you live, that's when you'll know that your small daily effort was never small at all.
Now that we've explored the power of starting small and the importance of staying consistent, we need to discuss something just as essential for long-term success: tracking your progress and building momentum. Because without these two components, even the best habits can lose direction and motivation over time.
You see, one of the greatest challenges in language learning and in habit formation in general is that progress often happens so slowly and subtly that it's almost invisible. And when we don't actively keep track of the small wins we're achieving, we tend to underestimate how far we've come, which leads to frustration and eventually giving up. That's why tracking isn't just a nice extra feature in the learning process. It's a vital tool for reflection, for motivation, and for reinforcing the identity that you're slowly building through your consistent efforts. Because what gets measured gets remembered, and what gets remembered gets reinforced.
Let me be clear. Tracking your English speaking habit doesn't need to be complex or time-consuming. It doesn't require a fancy app or a color-coded spreadsheet. In fact, sometimes the most powerful form of tracking is as simple as drawing a little X on a calendar each day that you show up and speak a sentence in English.
That X, although small and silent, becomes a symbol of your commitment, a mark of pride, a daily reminder that you're honoring the promise you made to yourself. And over time, those marks form a visual chain of success that your brain becomes deeply attached to maintaining.
This is the principle behind what some psychologists call the chain effect, where the longer your streak continues, the more motivated you feel to protect it, not just because of the streak itself, but because it represents your discipline, your consistency, and your transformation.
And this is where momentum begins to play a crucial role, because every action you take reinforces the idea that you are the kind of person who takes action. And the more you act, the easier it becomes to act again, like a wheel that gets easier to spin the more it turns.
Momentum is that invisible force that turns effort into ease, hesitation into habit, and small actions into large outcomes. But you only get momentum when you show up repeatedly, track your progress deliberately, and allow those little wins to stack up over time.
One of the greatest dangers in learning a language is underestimating your own progress simply because it's not obvious. But when you track what you say each day, even just a few words, you give yourself evidence that you are growing, evolving, and moving forward, even if it's slower than you'd like.
And this evidence becomes especially important on the hard days, on the days when you feel tired, discouraged, or full of doubt. Because when you can look back and see that you've already spoken English 20 days in a row, that simple fact can be enough to pull you through and remind you, I don't want to break the chain.
Momentum isn't just about feeling good. It's about reducing resistance. Because once something is in motion, it tends to stay in motion. And once you've got a rhythm going, it becomes harder not to speak than to just say your sentence and keep your streak alive.
That's why we always encourage learners to keep a very simple habit tracker, something you can see every day. Because when your progress is visible, your motivation becomes more stable. And when your motivation is stable, your results become inevitable.
Let me give you an example. One learner I worked with created a habit chain on a simple paper calendar, just drawing a star every time he spoke out loud for at least 1 minute. And after a few weeks, he had a full row of stars staring back at him every morning, reminding him, this is who I am now. This is what I do.
And interestingly, he told me that on days when he didn't feel like speaking, the fear of breaking that beautiful chain of stars was stronger than his laziness or his doubt, and so he'd speak anyway, not out of guilt, but because he didn't want to lose the pride he felt in his consistency.
That's the power of tracking. It makes your progress real, it gives you something to protect, and it turns invisible effort into visible success, which your mind begins to associate with satisfaction, competence, and confidence.
But beyond tracking, we also need to understand how to use momentum as a way to accelerate growth. Because once you've got the habit in place, and once you're tracking your actions daily, you can begin to gently increase the level of challenge without ever feeling overwhelmed.
Maybe that means turning one sentence into two, or adding a short audio shadowing session after your sentence, or recording your voice once a week and listening back to notice improvements. But these upgrades should never feel like pressure. They should feel like a natural extension of a habit that already exists.
And here's the most beautiful part. Once you're consistent and once you're tracking, your brain begins to feel safe inside this habit. And that safety is what creates the freedom to grow. Because now speaking English isn't a threat. It's part of your identity.
It's also important to celebrate small wins along the way, because motivation is not only about challenge and growth, it's also about reward. And when you take a moment to acknowledge your effort, whether that's checking off a box or simply saying, well done to yourself, your brain registers that speaking English is emotionally rewarding.
Too many learners wait for big moments to celebrate. Passing an exam, finishing a course, having a long conversation. But if you can learn to find pride in the daily act of showing up, even with just one sentence, you'll stay motivated far longer than those who chase only the big results.
Remember, learning to speak English fluently is not a sprint. It's a marathon. And momentum is what keeps you moving mile after mile, day after day, especially on the days when inspiration is low and excuses are high.
So here's our suggestion. Start your own momentum journal today. Write down each day what you said, how you felt, or what you noticed about your speaking. And don't worry about grammar or perfection. This is for you, a quiet record of your effort, a daily conversation between you and your future self.
Because someday, maybe months from now, when you look back on that journal, you'll see a story of transformation, one sentence at a time, one day at a time. And you'll realize that momentum is not magic. It's discipline multiplied by time.
In the end, what you say doesn't need to be brilliant. What matters is that you say it often, and that you track it in a way that reminds you of how far you've come and how much you care about where you're going.
So build your chain, track your growth, trust the rhythm, and let momentum carry you forward, not through force, but through pride, purpose, and the power of consistency.
As we move forward in building English speaking habits that last, it's essential to address an inevitable part of the journey that many learners face but few openly talked about: setbacks. Because no matter how committed you are or how well you track your progress, there will be moments when motivation wanes, circumstances disrupt your routine, or unexpected challenges arise that threaten to break the momentum you've carefully built.
Exactly. Setbacks are not signs of failure. Rather, they are natural and necessary parts of any growth process. And understanding how to respond to them with patience and strategy is what separates those who persist in their language learning journey from those who quit early, overwhelmed by frustration or guilt.
The first thing to realize is that setbacks happen to everyone, and that includes the most successful learners and even native speakers who face their own communication hurdles. So when you encounter a day, a week, or even longer stretches when you don't practice or feel discouraged, it's not a personal defect. It's just part of being human.
In fact, research in psychology shows that setbacks often serve a valuable function. They force us to reflect on our goals, to reconsider our strategies, and sometimes to rest and recharge, which are all necessary for sustainable growth. So instead of fearing setbacks, we should welcome them as opportunities for deeper learning and adjustment.
One of the most important mindset shifts you can make is to view setbacks as temporary detours rather than dead ends. Because when you accept that these disruptions are temporary, it becomes easier to forgive yourself and to plan a realistic way to get back on track without spiraling into self-criticism.
Self-compassion plays a crucial role here. Instead of harshly judging yourself for missing a day or stumbling over words, remind yourself that language learning is a marathon, not a race, and that kindness towards yourself fuels resilience, giving you the strength to keep going rather than giving up.
Practically speaking, one useful approach is to prepare in advance for setbacks by creating a flexible plan. This plan includes knowing how to restart after a break, identifying simple, minimum effort actions you can take when motivation is low, and having reminders of why you started this journey in the first place.
For example, you might decide that on difficult days, your goal is simply to say one sentence out loud or to listen to a favorite English podcast for 5 minutes. Something so small it feels doable even when you're tired or stressed, because these tiny actions keep the habit alive and make re-entry easier.
Another practical tip is to review your habit tracker regularly, not to punish yourself for missed days, but to remind yourself of the overall progress you have made. Because seeing that your chain is mostly intact can rekindle your motivation and help you recognize that setbacks don't erase all the hard work you've invested. Also, sharing your setbacks with a trusted friend, mentor, or language partner can be surprisingly powerful, since external support often helps reduce feelings of isolation and self-doubt, and others can offer encouragement, accountability, or simply a listening ear that reminds you that you are not alone.
It's equally important to analyze the causes of your setbacks without blame, identifying whether they came from external factors like a busy schedule or illness, or internal ones like fear, boredom, or self-doubt. Because understanding the root causes enables you to adjust your approach to better suit your life and emotional state.
For instance, if stress is a recurring barrier, You might integrate relaxation techniques or mindfulness exercises before practicing English. Or, if boredom is a factor, you might seek new materials, topics, or formats to reignite your interest and engagement.
Remember that every setback is a learning opportunity that reveals more about yourself and your habits. And by treating these moments with curiosity rather than frustration, you develop a growth mindset that sees challenges as invitations to adapt and improve.
In addition, celebrating how you overcome setbacks, no matter how small the victory, builds confidence and reinforces your identity as someone who perseveres, which in turn creates a positive feedback loop that makes future setbacks easier to handle.
Finally, always keep your long-term vision in mind, the reason you began learning English in the first place, and remind yourself that setbacks are temporary interruptions in a much larger story of progress and achievement. And your commitment to that vision is what will carry you through the difficult moments.
To summarize, overcoming setbacks requires patience, self-compassion, flexibility in your plans, small manageable actions during low motivation periods, honest reflection on causes, seeking support when needed, and maintaining a big picture perspective that honors your long-term goals and personal growth.
With these strategies in place, you not only survive setbacks, but use them as stepping stones that strengthen your habit, deepen your learning, and ultimately bring you closer to speaking English with confidence and fluency that lasts.
One of the most effective ways to ensure that English-speaking habits stick is to seamlessly integrate English practice into your daily life. Because when speaking English becomes a natural and routine part of your everyday activities, rather than a separate or occasional task, it no longer feels like an obligation, but rather a normal, even enjoyable part of your lifestyle.
That's right. And the key here is to identify those moments in your daily routine where English can naturally fit in without requiring extra effort or time, such as talking to yourself in English while cooking, describing your surroundings aloud during a walk, or narrating your actions as you go about your day.
For example, when you're preparing your morning coffee or getting dressed, you might practice simple sentences like describing what you're doing or stating your plans for the day, which at first might feel awkward, but gradually becomes automatic and even helpful in organizing your thoughts.
Another powerful strategy is to incorporate English into your hobbies or interests. So if you enjoy reading, you might read articles or books in English out loud. Or if you like music, you could sing along to English songs, practicing pronunciation and rhythm while enjoying yourself.
Technology also provides numerous opportunities to integrate English speaking into daily life. Setting your phone, computer, or apps to English forces you to interact with the language regularly, while voice assistants like Siri or Google Assistant can serve as informal conversation partners to practice simple commands and questions.
Additionally, social media and messaging apps offer a chance to engage in English conversations with friends or language partners at any time. And even writing voice notes in English can improve your fluency and confidence speaking spontaneously.
The important thing is to make English a natural background presence that you can turn to easily without scheduling separate practice sessions that might feel burdensome or intimidating. Because consistency over time is much more valuable than intensity that leads to burnout.
This approach also aligns with how children learn their first language. They acquire it through continuous exposure and use embedded in their daily lives, not through forced or isolated drills, which suggests that immersion and integration are crucial for adult learners as well. Of course, it requires creativity and commitment to find these natural moments and to consistently use them. But once you start noticing how much time you already spend on activities where English can fit, it becomes clear that you have far more opportunities than you imagined.
And by making these small, everyday speaking moments enjoyable and pressure-free, you lower the mental barriers that often hold learners back, such as fear of making mistakes or feeling self-conscious, because the stakes feel lower when you're just talking to yourself or your phone.
In summary, Integrating English speaking into daily life transforms language learning from a chore into a lifestyle, increasing your exposure, reinforcing your habits, and building your confidence in a sustainable and enjoyable way that sets the foundation for long-term success.
When it comes to building English speaking habits that endure and truly improve your fluency, an essential element that many learners underestimate is the role of receiving and applying feedback. Because without constructive feedback, you risk reinforcing mistakes or developing habits that don't serve your progress. So embracing feedback as a tool for growth is vital to your language journey.
Absolutely. Feedback acts as a mirror, reflecting back to you areas of your speaking that need refinement, whether it's pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary usage, or even intonation. And the sooner you learn to welcome this mirror, the faster your speaking skills will evolve beyond the plateau that many learners experience after initial progress.
It's important to distinguish between different types of feedback. Some may come from language teachers or professional tutors who provide detailed correction and explanation, while other feedback might come informally from language partners, friends, or even language learning apps that offer automated pronunciation or grammar checks.
Each type of feedback serves a purpose. Professional feedback gives you a clear roadmap for improvement with structured guidance, whereas informal feedback helps you develop conversational confidence and fluency in more natural, spontaneous contexts. And together, they create a balanced approach to learning.
One common hesitation among learners is the fear of criticism, which leads them to avoid feedback altogether. But it's critical to reframe this fear by understanding that feedback is never a personal attack, but a helpful nudge that points you toward areas where your communication can become clearer and more effective.
In fact, learning to handle feedback with openness and without defensiveness is itself a skill that improves with practice. And developing this mindset allows you to extract maximum benefit from every correction or suggestion, turning perceived weaknesses into strengths.
A practical method for making the most of feedback is to keep a dedicated journal or digital log where you record the corrections you receive and revisit them regularly, reinforcing your awareness and actively working on those specific points during your speaking practice.
Additionally, it's beneficial to prioritize which feedback to focus on first. Attempting to correct everything at once can be overwhelming, so starting with the most frequent or impactful errors helps maintain motivation and allows for clearer progress.
Another key to effective use of feedback is self-monitoring. Recording yourself speaking and listening critically can help you identify mistakes independently, complementing external feedback and fostering greater self-awareness.
Also, when possible, engage in reflective conversations with your feedback providers, asking questions to clarify their comments and understand why certain corrections are necessary, which deepens your learning and avoids misunderstandings.
Remember that feedback loops should be regular and ongoing rather than occasional, because consistent refinement accelerates your learning curve and prevents fossilization of errors that become harder to correct over time.
It's equally important to celebrate your improvements and acknowledge progress, even if it feels incremental, as positive reinforcement builds confidence and keeps you motivated to continue welcoming and applying feedback.
In conclusion, integrating feedback into your English speaking habit development is a powerful accelerator that sharpens your skills, builds your self-awareness, and ensures that your efforts lead to meaningful, lasting improvements in your ability to communicate effectively.
Building consistent English-speaking habits inevitably comes with challenges that can feel discouraging, but recognizing these common obstacles ahead of time and having strategies to overcome them can make all the difference in maintaining motivation and progress over the long term.
One of the most frequent challenges learners face is the fear of making mistakes, which can lead to hesitation and silence during conversations. But it's important to understand that mistakes are not signs of failure, They are natural steps in the learning process and valuable opportunities to improve.
Another challenge is the lack of immediate feedback, especially for self-learners who don't have a teacher or partner to correct them regularly, which can cause habits to solidify incorrectly and slow down progress. So finding ways to get feedback, even through technology or community groups, is crucial.
Time management is also a significant barrier, as busy schedules often make it difficult to dedicate regular time to practice. But even brief daily sessions of a few minutes can accumulate into meaningful progress if approached consistently with focus.
Additionally, many learners struggle with perfectionism, setting unrealistically high standards for themselves that create pressure and lead to burnout. So it's essential to set achievable goals and celebrate small wins that build confidence steadily rather than seeking instant fluency.
Lack of motivation can also derail speaking habits, especially when progress feels slow or when learners don't see immediate results. But reconnecting with the personal reasons for learning English and varying practice methods can help renew enthusiasm.
Environmental factors, such as limited access to English-speaking communities or immersive environments, can make it harder to practice speaking regularly. But technology offers powerful solutions like online language exchanges, video calls, and interactive apps to bridge that gap.
Sometimes learners encounter plateau phases where improvement seems to stall, which is frustrating but normal. Understanding that language learning is nonlinear and persistence through plateaus leads to breakthroughs is key.
Stress and anxiety about speaking can also inhibit practice, so developing relaxation techniques and building a supportive learning environment where mistakes are welcomed can reduce this psychological barrier.
Finally, inconsistency often undermines habit formation, so creating reminders, setting specific times for practice, and using habit tracking tools help maintain momentum and accountability.
In overcoming these challenges, it's important to adopt a growth mindset, viewing setbacks as opportunities to learn rather than reasons to quit, and to seek out resources, communities, and strategies that support your individual learning style and circumstances.
By anticipating and proactively addressing these common challenges, you set yourself up for sustained success, turning obstacles into stepping stones on your journey to fluent and confident English speaking.
Sustaining your English-speaking habits over the long term requires deliberate effort to maintain momentum, because without ongoing motivation and engagement, even well-established habits can weaken or disappear over time. So understanding how to keep your enthusiasm alive and your practice meaningful is critical to your ultimate success.
One key strategy for maintaining momentum is to regularly set new, challenging, but attainable goals that give your practice a clear purpose and direction. Because working towards specific targets, whether mastering a particular set of phrases, improving pronunciation, or preparing for a presentation, keeps your learning active and focused.
It's also essential to diversify your practice methods to prevent boredom and burnout. Incorporating activities like watching English movies, participating in discussion groups, reading aloud, and engaging in role plays can refresh your learning experience and keep you intellectually stimulated.
Tracking your progress visually, such as marking milestones on a calendar or using apps that log your practice time and achievements, provides tangible evidence of your growth, which can boost your confidence and remind you of how far you've come during moments of doubt.
Another powerful way to maintain momentum is to build a supportive community around your language goals. Whether through language exchange partners, online forums, or local clubs, because social interaction adds accountability, encouragement, and a sense of belonging that motivates consistent practice.
Celebrating your successes, no matter how small, helps reinforce positive feelings associated with your learning. So make it a habit to acknowledge improvements, whether you've mastered a difficult phrase or handled a conversation more smoothly than before. as this builds a positive feedback loop.
It's also important to remain flexible and patient with yourself, recognizing that life circumstances change and that sometimes your practice frequency or intensity will vary. Adjusting your expectations accordingly helps avoid frustration and keeps your relationship with English enjoyable rather than stressful.
Moreover, revisiting your personal reasons for learning English can rekindle your intrinsic motivation, especially during times when external motivation wanes. So, periodically reflecting on how English fits into your broader life goals or dreams can provide renewed energy.
Setting up rituals around your practice, such as a morning English journal or an evening conversation with a partner, can anchor your habits and make them harder to skip because routines reduce decision fatigue and make practice a natural part of your day.
Finally, embracing a lifelong learning mindset is crucial. Understanding that language mastery is a continuous journey rather than a fixed destination encourages ongoing curiosity and growth, which keeps your speaking skills sharp and evolving indefinitely.
In conclusion, maintaining momentum involves a combination of purposeful goal setting, varied and enjoyable practice, community support, positive reinforcement, flexibility, and deep personal connection to your learning journey, all of which create a resilient foundation for long-term success in speaking English fluently and confidently.